It is something that we absolutely take seriously in terms of wanting people to get the benefits to which they're entitled, and I'm sure he, as a very diligent local MP, will be able to use every lever that he has in order to improve the prospects of his constituents.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The £170 million winter support package recently announced by my right honourable friend will be a lifeline for families hardest hit by COVID-19 in Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Tork. So will my honourable friend ensure that community groups like the Pop-Up Pantry in Chell and the Salvation Armies in Smallthorne, Kidsgrove and Tunstall get to the support they need in order to support the most vulnerable in my community?
Well, I thank my friend for that question. Our £170 million COVID winter grant scheme will enable local authorities to support vulnerable households this winter with food and key utilities. As the Secretary of State's already made clear, there are conditions, but I would certainly encourage local authorities to work with partners on the ground, making sure that this support reaches people across our communities.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be aware that according to the Office for National Statistics, the national average increase in unemployment has risen by 24%, but for over 50s, it's risen by a third. Yet vacancies have fallen by 278,000 since the pre-pandemic period. Does the Minister agree that there are approximately 250,000 people over 50 who will never find work again?
Well, the latest ONS labour and market data puts unemployment level in the West Midlands region at 145,000. Now, due to the pandemic, this rate has risen nationally, and DWP is working across government and looking very closely at these figures, using, for example, on older workers, our Fuller Working Lives plan. And we are working with external organisations and partners to ensure a local and tailored response for all communities so that people aren't left behind. And the honourable member we've heard today, we're recruiting additional work coaches as well to make sure that new and existing claimants do get the opportunity to return to fulfilling work.
Jonathan Edwards.
Mr. Speaker. The decision to deny disabled people the legacy benefits, the crucial £20 uplift, has been a bitter blow to those who are already facing years of navigating barriers within the welfare system. Will the Department commit to using the Welfare Green Paper and the National Disability Strategy to ensure that disabled people have access to a welfare system which provides financial security without cruel sanctions?
I thank the honourable member for that question. The DWP Green Paper will be looking and working with disabled people's organisations and disability stakeholder groups to shape the way that we provide financial support and general support across our services. But I would remind the honourable member that this year we'll have seen a 5% increase up to £20 billion on supporting people with disabilities through benefits, and that through the legacy benefit increases, those also impacted on the changes with the local housing allowance, discretionary housing support being increased, the various employment support schemes and additional support provided through local authorities, of which many disabled people will have benefited.
Can I just say to Secretary Coffey, thank you to your team. We've absolutely cleared everyone on the list. Thank you, everybody. We've all worked well together. In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order. Order. I call Bel Ribeiro Addy to ask her urgent question. Bel Ribeiro Addy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for the Home Department to make a statement on the scheduled mass deportation by charter plane to Jamaica.
Minister Phil.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This charter flight to Jamaica is specifically to remove foreign criminals. The offences committed by the individuals on this flight include sexual assault against children, murder, rape, drug dealing and violent crime. These are serious offences which have a real and lasting impact on the victims and on our communities. This flight is about criminality, not nationality, and let me emphasise, it has nothing to do with the terrible wrongs faced by the Windrush generation. Despite the extensive lobbying by some claiming that the flight is about the Windrush generation, it is not. Not a single individual on this flight is eligible for the Windrush scheme. They are all Jamaican citizens, and no one on the flight was born in the United Kingdom. They are all foreign national offenders, and between them have served 228 years, plus a life sentence in prison. It is a long-standing government policy that any foreign national offender will be considered for deportation. Under the Borders Act 2007, introduced and passed by a Labour government with the votes of a number of honourable members present today, a deportation order must be made where a foreign national offender has been convicted of an offence and received a custodial sentence of 12 months or more. And under the Immigration Act 1971, FNOs who have caused serious harm or who is a persistent offender is eligible for consideration as well. Mr Speaker, let me put this flight in context. In the year ending June 2020, there were 5,208 enforced returns, of which 2,630 were to European Union countries, over half, and only 33 out of over 5,000 were to Jamaica, less than 1%. During the pandemic, we have continued with returns and deportations on scheduled flights and over 30 charter flights to countries including Albania, France, Germany, Ghana, Lithuania, Nigeria, Poland and Spain, none of which I noticed provoked an urgent question. The clear majority of these charter flights this year have been to European countries. Those being deported have ample opportunity to raise reasons why they should not be. We are, however, already seeing a number of last-minute legal claims, including in the last few days by a convicted murderer who has now been removed from the flight. This government's priority is keeping the people of this country safe, and we make no apology for seeking to remove dangerous foreign criminals. Any member of this House, with the safety of their constituents at heart, will do exactly the same.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Firstly, no one opposing this flight condones any of the crimes that these individuals have been found guilty of. It's the process of mass deportation which is fundamentally wrong. It's notorious for bundling people out of the country without due process. Does the Minister recognise that this decision effectively amounts to double jeopardy when those with some lesser offences have already served their custodial sentence? And does he recognise that the message that it sends about the consequences of being a white offender or being a black offender, given the racial disparities in sentencing? I hope the Minister agrees that no one is above the law, not even the government, and that no one is beneath adequate defence and proper legal representation, not even those born in other countries. So will he outline whether the deportees have been granted access to adequate legal advice and representation, whether any have been allowed to appeal these decisions, particularly given the lockdown descriptions and the likelihood that they would have no access to legal aid? On being above the law, just as a final point, the Equality and Human Rights Commission has recently found the Home Office unlawfully ignored the warnings that the hostile environment was discriminatory. Can the Minister explain why the government is so comfortable continuing with a key part of the hostile environment policy when it's been so damningly called into question? And finally, has the Minister considered the impact on the 31 children who will be impacted by having a parent removed from this country? Mr Speaker, the Home Office have got it wrong again and again on immigration, so will they think again, halt the deportation flight and finally end the illegal hostile environment?
Well, Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady speaks of what she calls mass deportations. I've already pointed out that over the last year, of the 5,800 people who've been removed, only 33 have been of Jamaican nationality. She mentioned black versus white. She was insinuating in her question there was some element of underlying racism in this. But I've pointed out already that the majority of people, the vast majority of people who are removed or have been removed this year, have been removed to European countries. This policy applies to people from Spain and France and Italy as much as it does to people from Jamaica. There is no element of discrimination in this policy whatsoever, and she was completely wrong to insinuate that in some way there was. She asked a question about double jeopardy. She said, well, they've been punished once by a prison sentence already. But I say this, if somebody comes to this country and commits a serious criminal offence and puts our constituents at risk, it is right that once they've served their sentence, or a great part of it, they should be removed. And it's not just me that thinks that, it's the Labour members who voted for this law in 2007 who think that, some of whom are sitting in this chamber today. She mentions the ECHR and the compliant environment. This is nothing to do with the compliant environment. This is about implementing the 2007 Borders Act as we are obliged to do, and in terms of due process, there are ample opportunities to complain and appeal, as many people do. I've mentioned already the case of a murderer who was taken off this flight just a few days ago following legal appeals. We are protecting our fellow citizens, and I suggest the Honourable Lady takes a similar approach.
Let's head up to Harrow East with Bob Blackman. Bob Blackman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And will my honourable friend make clear that people that come to the United Kingdom to contribute to our economy, that contribute to our society, are most welcome. But those who come from foreign countries and then commit the most heinous of crimes, be it murder, sexual violence, violence against children, violence against the person, can expect to experience the full force of the law and then be required to leave the country at the end of their sentence. And does he agree with me that far from the public disagreeing with this, they are wholly in support and expect the government to take this action to keep society safe?
Well, my honourable friend, as always, puts it very well. Of course, where people come to this country as immigrants and make a contribution to academia, to the work environment, and in a myriad of other ways, then we welcome them with open arms. Of course we do. And our new points-based system, to become active in just a few days' time, does precisely that. But as he says, if somebody comes to this country and enjoys our hospitality, but abuses that hospitality by committing a serious criminal offence, they can, should, and will be removed in the interests of public protection.
We have 2 minutes for the Shadow Minister, Holly Lynch.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Can I firstly pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Stretton, for having secured such an important and time-critical urgent question. I also want to pay tribute to my right honourable friend, the member for Tottenham, for his work and advocacy on this important area previously. The news of this flight comes just days after the Equality and Human Rights Commission found that the government, as we've already heard, acted unlawfully in its treatment of the Windrush generation through the hostile environment. As Caroline Waters, the chair of the EHRC, said, the treatment of the Windrush generation as a result of hostile environment policies was a shameful stain on British history. There is no clear timetable for implementing the recommendations from the Wendy Williams report, and with just 12% of applicants having received a payment and at least 9 people have died waiting, the Windrush compensation scheme is failing badly. The Minister has said in his written response to me over the weekend that it's wrong and offensive to conflate this returns flight with the Windrush scandal, but I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, given this government's track record, its failings on Windrush, the delays in the compensation scheme, we simply have no faith that this government has done its due diligence in relation to those on this scheduled flight, and we would not be doing ours if we did not ask the questions. Of course, we recognise that those who engage in violent and criminal acts must face justice, but we also hear that at least one person on that flight has a Windrush generation grandfather, another whose great aunt was on the HMT Windrush, another whose grandfather fought in the Second World War for Britain. It's clear that we have not yet established just how far the consequences of the Windrush injustice extend. With this in mind, what assessment has been made to ensure that none of those scheduled to be on the flight are eligible under the Windrush scheme or been affected by the wider immigration injustices that impacted on the victims of the Windrush scandal? What assurances can the Minister provide the House that the mandatory duty to safeguard and promote the welfare of the children left behind who are innocent in this have been considered. It's also been reported that the Home Office has reached an agreement with the Jamaican government that people who left Jamaica as children will no longer be repatriated. Can he confirm if this is the case, and can he also confirm at what age someone would need to be to have been determined to be a child?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Honourable Lady, the Shadow Minister, asks about the Windrush scheme, and as she will be aware, over 6,300 people have now been given citizenship, quite rightly, and 13,300 documents have been issued to those people who suffered terrible wrongs in the past. In terms of compensation, 226 people have now received claims totalling in excess of £2.1 million, with a great deal more to pay out. I can also confirm that all of these cases on the plane have been individually assessed, and none of them are eligible for the Windrush compensation scheme. The Honourable Lady spent a great deal of time in her question talking about Windrush, but I say again, as I said in my letter to her, it is completely wrong to conflate the people who were victims of terrible injustice in the Windrush cases with these cases who are nothing to do with Windrush, have no Windrush entitlement at all, and who have committed terrible criminal offences. She asks about the age eligibility. Well, the government is fully committed, of course, to discharging its obligations under the 2007 Act, which is to seek to remove anyone of any age who has been sentenced to a custodial term of over 12 months. That has been, that is, and that will remain our policy. I'm not going to comment on the individual operational circumstances surrounding any particular flight, but we're fully committed to the 2007 Act's provisions. And in relation to children, there is a well-defined test around family rights and how that interacts with removal, and it is possible for people to go to the courts if they want to test their family rights against the government's obligations to remove them. But we are clear, our priority is protecting British citizens from dangerous criminals, and that is what we're doing.
Let's head up to Mansfield with Ben Bradley. Ben Bradley.
Mr. Speaker, the overwhelming majority of Mansfield residents will feel that foreign criminals of any nationality who violate our laws and our values should be removed from this country. Will my honourable friend assure me and my constituents that it's public safety that's at the front of his mind? Will he be clear that Labour's attempts to draw everything into an argument about race are both plainly wrong and quite brazenly an attempt to just silence people they disagree with? And will he call out those celebrities who've spent their weekends trying to use their public profiles to shame businesses into not helping remove murderers from the UK?
Well, I agree with my honourable friend's sentiments. This is about protecting the British public. I'm aware of cases where people have been removed from the deportation or removal programme owing to various appeals and have then gone on to commit crimes against our fellow citizens. It is precisely those kind of repeat crimes which damage our fellow citizens, our constituents, that we are seeking to prevent. And in relation to the celebrities and everything they've been saying, they should pay attention to the fact that, as I've said before, the majority of removals and deportations are to European countries. And any suggestion that there is a racial element to this is obviously confounded by a straightforward look at the facts. As I say, over half the flights are to European countries. Less than 1% of removals in the past year have been to Jamaica. Anyone who is assisting the Home Office in these flights is doing a service to the country by protecting our fellow citizens.
We have a 1-minute SNP spokesperson, Stuart MacDonald. Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While some deportation decisions are clear-cut, many more involve careful balancing exercises, weighing up a whole range of factors. The problem is that it's very difficult to trust the Home Office to make those judgment calls, as week after week its policies and practices are torn to pieces in report after report. Stephen Shaw, in his Government Commissioned report, said deportation and removal of people brought up here from a young age was deeply troubling and entirely disproportionate. So why not act on that advice and exclude in law deportation of those who have spent their childhood years here? More broadly, why not commission Stephen Shaw to review the whole framework on deportation? Because until something like that happens, we simply cannot and will not have any faith in these decisions. Finally, could the Minister, he appears to repeatedly conflate deportations and removals. So could you give us the separate figures for deportations only? Thank you.
Well, in relation to deportations only, the 1% figure is very similar to the figure for removals more generally. In relation to his point about Stephen Shaw, we did not accept back in 2018 his recommendation about age. We don't accept it now, and we remain fully committed to implementing the obligations imposed by the 2007 Borders Act as passed by the last Labour government. And in terms of due process and decision making, of course there is an extensive set of legal processes which anyone is able to avail themselves of, and they frequently do. I mentioned that just a few days ago somebody convicted of murder got themselves taken off the flight by launching just such an appeal. So there are, I would say, plenty of processes, I say that advisedly, plenty of processes which people can avail themselves of if they disagree with any particular decision.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. The opposition have been very clear. They oppose this government's efforts to deport foreign criminals who pose a risk to the British public and the people of Stoke-on-Trent. Does my honourable friend agree that this Conservative Party is the only party committed to law and order, evidenced further by our extra funding for more police?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. He is a great champion for the people of Stoke-on-Trent and in ensuring their safety as well. It is very disappointing to hear Labour members questioning the removal of dangerous foreign nationals, although interestingly they've only been raising it now, and this is we've had over 30 charter flights go this year, and it's the first time they've thought to raise this issue. But my friend is right. This is a government that will defend the public, will stand up for the safety of our constituents, and that is what we're doing on Wednesday.
The Select Committee, Rebecca Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will understand that there is a backdrop of distrust among the communities that have been affected by the Windrush scandal, and that he should be trying to address in order to build confidence in the deportation decisions. So, given the Home Office response to a previous Select Committee report on Windrush, identified 32 people who were deported in the past as deemed foreign national offenders, but who were likely to be part of the Windrush generation and whose circumstances have never been investigated. Given that the NAO and also Wendy Williams has recommended that the circumstances of those cases should be investigated, will he now do so?
Well, let me start by just offering the Select Committee Chairman reassurance in regards to the flight this week. All of the people in scope for that flight have had their cases individually checked, and none of them are in the scope of the Windrush compensation scheme. And as I say, none were born in the United Kingdom. So those checks that she quite rightly calls for have been diligently carried out. In relation to the 32 historic cases that she referred to, I will look into that and write to her.
Speaker, I do find it extraordinary that the opposition choose an urgent question to plead the case for serious foreign criminals, rather than standing up for the victims of crime, particularly on a day when an urgent question might have been more appropriate on the issue of the imminent, extraordinarily early release of a woman, Mariah Philpott, for the killing of 6 of her own children. So can my honourable friend...
Order. The suggestion is that I believe the urgent question was correct to have. Also, there was no other alternative question. Maybe if you'd put one in, we could have considered it. Tim Lawton.
I'm not criticising you at all, Mr. Speaker. I'm just questioning priorities. So can I ask the Minister, how much are we spending already on housing these foreign criminals in the UK, and how much taxpayers' money is being wasted on chartering places on flights that they then don't actually take at the last minute?
Well, I certainly concur that Mr. Speaker is wholly infallible in all matters. Well, I do share the honourable gentleman's surprise at this question being tabled, when the government is simply discharging not only its duty, its obligation under an Act of Parliament passed by the last Labour government with the votes of a number of members sitting in this chamber on the other side this afternoon. And we are doing the right thing by protecting our fellow citizens. Many of the people concerned were living in the community rather than being housed. Our principal objective is public safety rather than finances. But his last point about charter flights is right. We do suffer astonishingly high levels of legal attrition on these flights, largely as a result of legal claims often made at the very, very last minute. Sometimes I wonder, perhaps even intentionally, at the last minute. We do need to tighten up our legal system, and as the honourable gentleman may know, the government intends to legislate next year to do exactly that.
Mr Carmichael.
Mr Speaker, even if the Home Office were halfway competent in dealing with these matters, this would still be an area that is absolutely fraught with difficulties, as the figures given to the House by the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee indicate. It's been reported that the Government has now entered into an agreement with the Government of Jamaica regarding this flight and others. When will that agreement be published?
Well, we do not have any formal agreements. What we do have is an ongoing dialogue about any individual flight or any individual operational circumstance. But let me make completely clear that our commitment to discharging our duty under the 2007 Act, which is to seek to remove or deport rather anyone committed of an offence of over a one-year sentence, regardless of their age on arrival, remains steadfastly in place.
As a magistrate and on many prison visits, I frequently encountered criminals who had come to the UK from overseas, committed serious offences that caused pain, suffering and long-lasting psychological harm. So does my honourable friend agree with me that the responsibility of all of us across this House is to stand up for the victims of those crimes?
Well, as speaking as a magistrate, my honourable friend hits the nail exactly on the head. The principal concern of members of Parliament in this House should be protecting the victims of crime, protecting our constituents from the harm which they might otherwise be done by foreign national offenders. And that is precisely why it is the right thing to do to remove foreign national offenders so they can't commit any more offences against our constituents.
Let's head to Hackney with Diana Abbott. Diane Abbott.
Does the Minister accept that many people feel that this mass deportation is both cruel and potentially dangerous? Cruel because he is separating families of people who have served their sentence, separating families just weeks from Christmas, and possibly dangerous because he is deporting vulnerable people, communities we know are particularly vulnerable to coronavirus, in the middle of a pandemic.
Well, the Right Honourable Lady asks about whether this is the right thing to do. And the answer to that question is categorically yes, an answer that she herself gave when she voted in 2007 for the Act of Parliament under which the government is required to carry out these deportations. So the Honourable Lady herself voted for this measure. In relation to coronavirus risks, we've been carrying out these flights, as I said already, throughout the entire summer and autumn period, using methods which the High Court has found to be COVID safe in immigration removal centres, using things like reverse cohorting, distancing, frequent testing, temperature checks, and so on and so forth. So I do not accept the point that the Right Honourable Lady made. And let me say again, the overwhelming consideration for members of this House should be protection of our constituents.
Marco Longer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree with me and my constituents in Dudley North that any person who comes to this country, engages in criminal activity, breaks our laws, abuses our hospitality, have no place in our society? Yeah. And does he also agree with me that the government is therefore doing the correct thing by removing them from our country in the national security?
Yes, I agree entirely with my honourable friend. We are, as I've said repeatedly, protecting our constituents from harm. These are dangerous offenders whose offences include murder, rape, sexual assault against children. It would be irresponsible of us to allow people such as that to remain in this country when they are not nationals of the United Kingdom.
And up to Greater Manchester with Afzal Khan. Afzal Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the EHRC concluded that the hostile environment policies pursued by this government broke equality law. Specifically, the EHRC noted that when negative equality impacts were identified by the Home Office and stakeholders, they were repeatedly ignored, dismissed, or their severity disregarded. With this in mind, can the Minister say with absolute certainty that neither his department nor any stakeholders have identified any negative equality impacts with this scheduled deportation flight? And if he cannot, does he not then agree that the flight should be immediately halted?
Well, this flight and others like it are not part of the compliant environment which the EHCR report referred to. This is taking place as a statutory obligation under an Act of Parliament passed, as I've said already, by the last Labour government, who I'm confident they gave very careful consideration to the equalities implications of the Act of Parliament which they passed. But as I've also said, we've looked at each case individually and are confident that, we know in fact, that none of these cases are Windrush eligible. And on the question of equality's impact more widely, I've already pointed out 2 or 3 times that the majority of people subject to these charter flight deportations and removals are to the European Union, which should tell him a great deal.
Let's head to Romsey with Caroline Noakes. Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my honourable friend explain what level of discretion the 2007 Act gives ministers and reassure the House that both he and my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, have considered every single case on this flight and deemed them to be suitable for deportation under the conditions of that Act?
Well, we are very mindful of the obligations placed upon the Home Office and the government by the terms of the 2007 Act, and we seek to fully abide by its terms. And as I said, everyone in the scope of the charter flight going in a few days' time has been very carefully considered to ensure that they are fully compliant with the obligations imposed by the Act that the Right Honourable Lady refers to.
Abena Pongasari.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The cost of deportation, economic, ethical, and most importantly, human cannot be justified. Can the Minister confirm that an equalities impact assessment has been completed regarding these proposed deportations to demonstrate that you have paid due regard to equalities legislation?
The Honourable Lady talks about human cost. Let me tell her about the human cost caused by these criminals. What about the children who have been sexually assaulted by these criminals? What about the victims who have been murdered by these people? What about the victims of violent assault? What about the people whose lives have been ruined by drug addiction or who have been the victims of rape? What about those human tragedies? The Honourable Lady and many members opposite appear to have nothing whatsoever to say about the human tragedy of the victims. Let's put the victims at the centre of today's debate. They are the people we should be standing up for and speaking for. This government will protect them. Why won't she?
Christian Wakeford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Welcome to the modern Labour Party. More concerned about stopping the deportation of foreign criminals than keeping our streets safe. We on this side of the chamber do take that obligation and duty seriously. That's why we're taking these measures. Can I thank my honourable friend for all the work that he is doing to deport these foreign serious criminals and make our country safer? And can he also confirm that every week this government is removing foreign criminals from the UK and that this fight is no different?
Yep, the honourable member is absolutely right. It is, of course, this Conservative government who is prioritising the victims and prioritising public safety. He is also right to say that the deportation of foreign national offenders, as we are required to do by law, does happen as a matter of routine, week in, week out.
Let's head up to Scotland with Dr. Philippa Whitford. Dr. Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and happy St Andrew's Day. It's not just whether people are themselves connected to the Windrush generation, but deporting those who've been in the UK since childhood shows the lessons of Windrush have not been learned. The Minister keeps referring to murderers and rapists, yet deportation applies to those with sentences as low as 12 months. Is it not time to provide legislative certainty and protection for those who come to the UK as children? And can the Minister say how many were originally included in this flight?
Well, of course, I would like to reciprocate by wishing the Honourable Lady a very happy St Andrew's Day as well. I'm sure the whole House would join together in doing that. When it comes to removing people who are not British citizens, who are citizens of another country, but who put our constituents at risk, it is, I think, right that we move to deport as we currently do. And the debate about whether some age threshold is appropriate is a debate this House had. It had that debate in 2007, and this House decided, I think rightly, that anyone who's convicted of an offence and sentenced to more than a year is in scope. That is, I think, well, I mean, the Honourable Member for Tottenham is saying something from a sedentary position. I mean, he himself voted for that act. So, you know, he himself expressed his opinion on this matter in the division lobby back in 2007.
Mr Speaker, and can I fully support what my honourable friend is doing to deport these dangerous criminals and to keep people in this country safe. But is my honourable friend as concerned as I am by reports that activist lawyers are trying to thwart the government's legal efforts to deport these criminals and to keep the British people safe?
Well, my honourable friend is right to raise concerns about abuse of legal process. We do, not just in this context, but actually across the entire immigration system. We do find that there are last-minute claims made, often immediately before removal or deportation, often 24 hours in advance, even though there's been plenty of opportunity previously, apparently with the express intention of frustrating the process. There is also opportunity for people to raise repeated claims in sequence, sometimes over a period of many years, in a manner that would appear to me to be potentially vexatious. That is something I think the government does need to act to sort out. The honourable gentleman is right, and we do intend to legislate next year to close precisely the problematic areas that my honourable friend rightly refers to.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituent on this flight came to the UK in 1997, aged 26, married a British citizen in 2004, has two children aged 21 and 18. He was in prison for 2 years, and had he not been, he would have been able to complete the process of indefinite leave to remain. His life was under threat when he was in Jamaica. It will be under threat if he is returned there. He's on suicide watch at the moment, and he has an active asylum claim. If he was picked up last week and due to be deported this week, would the Minister at least agree that this is not a proportionate reaction and that this flight should be delayed, at least to give the opportunity for proper legal advice to be taken?
Well, I'm not. I mean, I've got the particulars of the case here. He was sentenced to 4 years, served 2, and the offences were very serious offences indeed. No, we certainly won't be stopping the flight, but I do know we certainly will not stop it. But I do know the right honourable gentleman has written to me about this particular case, and I will, of course, respond to his letter.
Mr. Speaker, will the Minister commit to review any law that prevents the deportation of these people? Because no law should stop us from removing foreign nationals who committed very serious criminal offences and thereby undermining the very kindness that we've shown and the hospitality that we have shown them and abusing that process in doing so.
Yeah, well, I entirely agree with what the honourable member for Dartford just said, and I can give him that assurance. And he puts it very well. We have extended a welcome and hospitality to people that come to this country, rightly so. We have a long and proud history of welcoming people who make a contribution to our society, and this government is the first to recognise the enormous contribution that people who have come to this country as immigrants have made. And as I say, the points-based system embraces that very principle. But where people abuse our hospitality by committing serious criminal offences, it is right that we remove them.
Let's head up to Brent Central with Dawn Butler. Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister doesn't seem to understand the sensitivities around the Windrush scandal, but nobody's arguing about deporting very serious violent criminals. But can the Minister say with certainty that nobody on this flight has been convicted of just driving offences or have been groomed as children?
Well, I mean, as the Honourable Lady will know, only people who have been sentenced to a custodial sentence of a year or more are eligible. So clearly, minor driving offences are outside of the scope of that. It's only people who've been sentenced to a year or more in prison. And of course, she knows that very well because she voted for the Act of Parliament in 2007, which instituted these measures.
Philip Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fact that it's in any way controversial to deport foreign nationals who commit serious offences and are persistent offenders shows just what a farce the party opposite has actually become in recent years. Can I, and Lord knows what the public must think of this exchange, can I say to the Minister that the overwhelming majority of my constituents will absolutely support what he's doing, but actually would want him to ignore the siren voices opposite and actually to make it easier to deport foreign nationals who commit offences, perhaps those who commit any offence at all, not just those who have to serve over a year in prison?
Well, I'm very grateful for the support emanating from the people of Shipley. I think the public will be astonished to see Labour MPs standing up on the side of dangerous criminals instead of standing up on the side of victims, and even more importantly, people who might be victims in the future. And in relation to improving the legal system as it stands, so we can more readily deport people who are dangerous criminals and others, as I said already, we do want to legislate to improve the system. It doesn't really work at the moment as it should, and he will have plenty of opportunities to support legislation with that purpose in mind next year.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Government plans to push ahead with the mass deportation of 50 people to Jamaica this week are both obscene and irresponsible and fly in the face of the damning EHRC report released only last week, which declared the hostile environment policies illegal. And we're talking about victims. What about the victims of Windrush generation who are still fighting for compensation and justice? So can the Minister outline whether the findings of the Equality and Human Rights Commission have been taken into account during this process?
Well, I've already pointed out that these flights are nothing to do with the compliant environment. None of the individuals are in the scope of the Windrush compensation scheme. And I must say, I think the Honourable Lady is doing a great disservice for those genuine victims of the Windrush tragedy, the Windrush scandal, by conflating them with dangerous offenders who are not British citizens and are eligible for deportation under an act the Labour government passed in 2007. She should reserve her indignation for those victims who have been affected by these terrible, terrible crimes.
Gagan Mahendra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The British people rightly expect foreign national offenders who violated our laws and our values to be removed from our country. Does my honourable friend agree that this charter flight shows we are acting in the interest of the British people and that we have their overwhelming support in taking this action?
Yes, I do strongly agree, and I think the public watching this afternoon's debate will be astonished to see some members opposite apparently not willing to stand up for our fellow citizens who have been victims of these terrible offences.
Let's head to Vauxhall with Florence Session-Lomi. Florence Session-Lomi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted by many of my constituents in Vauxhall who are concerned about these deportations. Now, given the government's track record on Windrush and the delay in implementing the lessons from the Wendy Review, it's understandable that honourable members in this House seek assurances and more detailed information from the Minister in regard to this deportation. The Home Secretary is rightly committed to implementing all of the 30 recommendations in that review. Will the Minister confirm how many recommendations have been implemented, and will he today give a clear timetable for when each of the 30 recommendations will be implemented?
Well, I've already given the House a very clear assurance that all of these cases have been individually looked at, and as I've said several times already, none are eligible for the Windrush compensation scheme. And it is wrong, indeed it's almost offensive, to conflate in any way these people who have committed terrible criminal offences with those victims of the Windrush scandal. They are completely different things, and it is wrong, completely wrong, to conflate them. As the Honourable Member says, the Home Secretary is fully committed to implementing each and every one of Wendy Williams' recommendations. She published a response to the Williams review back in September, and I know the Home Secretary will be keeping the House regularly updated about the timing of the implementation of each and every one of those 30 recommendations.
Mark Jenkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nearly 12 months ago, in constituencies like Workington, this People's Government was elected on a promise to make Britain safer and more secure. Does my honourable friend agree that by continuing to remove these dangerous criminals from this country, we are delivering on that commitment we made to the British people?
Yes, I do agree, of course, and my honourable friend puts the point very well. One of the most fundamental duties of any government is to protect its citizens, and ensuring that foreign nationals who are convicted of serious offences are removed from the country is one very important way in which a government can protect our fellow citizens. And as I said before, I'm aware of cases where people were eligible for removal or deportation, but for some legal challenge reason were not, and then went on to commit some really quite serious offences.
Let's head over to Lewisham with Vicky Foxcroft. Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a constituent on the flight who came to the UK aged 11. He has no friends or family in Jamaica, but he does have 3 children here who do not know that he's likely to be deported. Although he's desperate to see them one last time, he doesn't want them to worry. Now, has the government carried out any assessment of the impact this will have on his children who are likely to never see their father again?
Well, the balance between family rights and the obligation on the government to remove dangerous offenders is laid out in statute, and it is up to the courts to determine in each individual case, if a challenge is brought, how that balance is struck. I would, and I've got the case details in front of me, I don't want to recite them to the House for reasons of confidentiality, but the Honourable Lady's constituent is an extremely persistent and prolific offender, including some quite dangerous offences. But as I say, that balance between family rights and public safety is one set out in statute and struck by the courts. But I make no apology for putting public safety first.
Let's head to Derbyshire with Nigel Mills. Nigel Mills.
Thank you. There's great support in Amber Valley for the deportation of serious foreign national offenders, but also great concern at how long the process takes. Does the Minister have any plans to revert to the position from the 2014 Act, where some of these legal processes after the deportation?
Well, I'm afraid the rollout of rural broadband to the Honourable Member's House clearly has a bit of way to go because he broke up a little bit. I think the Honourable Member for Amber Valley was asking about finding ways of expediting the proceedings. And we are looking at ways we can expedite proceedings, including making sure provisions in previous Acts of Parliament, which you may have been asking about, can be properly implemented. So that is very high on the government's agenda, yes.
We go to Scott Benton.
Mr. Speaker, dangerous foreign criminals, including murderers, rapists and drug dealers, have no right whatsoever to remain in this country. The people of Blackpool South expect the government to be resolute in standing up to those activist, left-wing lawyers who in this instance are working against the clear national interest. Can my honourable friend confirm that he will never compromise the security and safety of my constituents by letting such dangerous offenders remain in the UK?
Yes, my honourable friend speaks very well for his Blackpool South constituents, as always. It is absolutely our intention to make sure that where there are dangerous people in the United Kingdom, we will tirelessly seek to remove them. That is our duty as a government, and we will work tirelessly, as I know he will, to discharge that duty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What worries me about my particular case, my constituent who's due to be deported, is that he has, I can't even name him today, because there are genuine grounds for him to believe that his life is under threat, credible grounds, that surely is a reason to pause and rethink whether he should be deported or not.
Well, I mean, there are obviously legal channels through which individuals can raise concerns of the type the Honourable Gentleman has just referred to. And as I say, many people do precisely that. A convicted murderer was just a few days ago released from the flight for similar reasons. However, let me make clear, it is our priority to protect British citizens. It should be his priority too.
Boris.
It has been disappointing that the members opposite have been less than supportive of the government's efforts to deport dangerous foreign criminals who pose a serious threat to this country's not only national security but also safety to the British people. And would my honourable friend agree with me that it is actually the Conservative Party that is the only party committed to standing up for the victims, having a firm hand for law and order, and making sure that this country remains safe and secure?
Minister.
He makes a very good point. It's been very conspicuous this afternoon that it's been on this side of the House, the government side of the House, that members have stood up speaking out for victims, speaking out for the safety of their constituents. And we have heard almost nothing of that from the benches opposite. The British public will have heard that and they will draw their own conclusions.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the Minister listens clearly, he will also hear that I'm speaking about victims and rehabilitation. The recommendations made by the Windrush Lessons Learned Review have still not been implemented in full, and we still do not know why people were illegally deported. It is this that has caused distrust in the government. Many of these predominantly black people set for deportation have already served their sentence. Many committed these offences when they were young. Other were victims of drugs operations known as county lines, or have been criminalised in association. Mr. Speaker, I put it to the government that many of these people have grown up in this country since childhood, and it is in our country's moral responsibility to rehabilitate them. Hear, hear.
Well, the Honourable Lady just said a few moments ago that the people subject to deportation proceedings are, and she said, mainly black. That is not true, because as I said earlier, very clearly, the majority of people removed and deported are removed and deported to European Union countries. And in the last year, well under 1% of people subject to these proceedings have come from Jamaica. And in relation to age, the test, as we've discussed already, is set out in statute in the 2007 Borders Act, an act passed by the last Labour government with the votes of a number of her colleagues who are sitting on her benches right now.
Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unlike members opposite, the people of Ashfield are absolutely delighted that murderers, rapists and other dangerous criminals are being flown out of the UK and deported to their country of origin. This will keep our streets safer and send out a clear message to anyone who does not share the values of our great country. Could my honourable friend please reassure me and the people of Ashfield that this government will continue to send vile criminals back to where they come from, as they have no place in our society? And can I also thank the members opposite for supporting this Act when it was passed in 2007?
Minister.
Well, I'm sure the members opposite who voted for the 2007 Act are extremely grateful for my honourable friend's reminder and thanks. But the thrust of his point I completely agree with. It is right that where someone endangers our fellow citizens, we act to deport them. Because if we don't do that, we are exposing our constituents to ongoing risk. That is completely unacceptable. This government will take action.
Final question, Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is making it clear that he and his department find it irksome having to comply with the current requirements of the law. Thank goodness they do, because the law is there to protect everyone. And I get the impression a number of members opposite don't approve of that. What access have those who are due to be on this flight had to legal advice prior to the flight's departure?
Minister.
Well, look, the government, I wouldn't say finds it irksome to offer people due legal process. Of course we don't, because we respect those legal processes. However, we do find it deeply frustrating and frankly at times inappropriate when the legal system and the legal process is used in an abusive or vexatious way, as it apparently sometimes is. That is something we intend to come to in legislation next year. In relation to access to justice, there are very ample opportunities provided for consultation with lawyers by all kinds of means. I would say, in my observation of people subject to Home Office proceedings, is one thing they're not short of is legal advice, very often legally aided. So that access to justice point that the honourable member refers to is certainly amply catered for in a whole range of different ways.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order.
Hello. Lovely to see you. Are you all right? Did you have a good weekend?
Come on, Mike. Order. We now come to statement from Secretary Eustace. Secretary Eustace.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on the Government's Agricultural Transition Plan published today. The Agriculture Bill received royal assent on the 11th of